get started. Just as a bit of an intro and a couple of notes for everybody that's already logged in. On my screen right now, if you are unaware, we have our SAFE training classes. These are live in-person training classes coming up this fall, and we have 7 locations that we're going to be doing classes at. So what we're doing here today on the webinar is going to be 2 days of full-blown training. And jokingly, I think we have 5 days worth of content to present. And so we don't want to kill everybody over 2 days. We're going to break that down, and we are going to find a way to give you as much as we can over 2 7-hour days of content on SAFE. So if you're unaware, you can go to trackerproducts.com, go to the top right-hand corner and go to events, and then you can click on the SAFE training events from there, and you can see the schedules. The first one's coming up August 23rd in Maple Grove, and we've got 6 more that are listed on there. So if you're interested in live training classes, please register for those. Another real quick side note, probably haven't brought this up in a while, is our evidence management community forum on Facebook. We are now over 800 members strong on that. And I don't know if you even know if it exists or have taken a look at it. I am constantly amazed at the amount of discussion and questions and maybe even more so the responses that are coming back from everybody that are in the community group. I think it's fantastic. It is a great place to go. If you have questions, need help with things, you can certainly go in there and post questions, and you'll have a lot of people that'll respond with their opinions and thoughts on whatever the topic is. Okay, we are now a few minutes after 2 o'clock here on the East Coast. I just happened to look out the window and it is pouring down rain in northern Kentucky, but it is a beautiful day. I hope it's a nice day wherever you are located at. I was brought in, so my name is Ben Townsend, and I've done a lot of these webinars in the past, but Rob does most of our training. But he brought me in for what I think is a fairly interesting topic today. You might look at storage locations and think, wow, that could be pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot to that. I'm going to try to really dig into this today and maybe even give you some things to think about that you've not thought about before as it comes to storage locations. So I'm not going to just go through how to create storage locations, even though we are going to do that, and how to print out labels. Yes, we do need to do that. I actually want to start with something a little more broad than that, and let's talk about just concepts and setting up storage locations, and maybe what are your thoughts on what is a storage location to begin with, okay? And what I've got here is I drew this up a little bit ago, and there's a stark difference between the top row and the bottom row. It is 4 shelves that are on the screen here. There's nothing special about these shelves, so don't dig into the shelves. It's just a picture of a shelf, a rolling shelf, and there are 4 rows on it, okay? But you'll notice that the ones up at the top, the shelf is labeled shelf ABC, the one on the right is DEF. But the ones on the top are labeled rows 1 through 4, and then down at the bottom, you'll notice that there is no row 1 through 4 on there. And to be honest with you, this concept right here, I don't know if it's controversial, but there's certainly 2 different ways that we see evidence rooms largely set up. And you can have people that will argue for the methodology up at the top, and others that will argue for the methodology down at the bottom. And I want to sort of break this down and talk about why would you maybe consider one versus the other. Now, in my opinion, I largely believe that when I go into an evidence room, what I mostly see is what's up at the top. Most evidence people are very, very specific about how they label things. As a matter of fact, you might see some people, they'll have boxes on each of these rows, and each one of those boxes is also labeled so that it's very, very specific. And so the end result of that is, if I were to tell you, here, let me see if I can somehow draw. Well, let's just pretend that there's a box on this shelf right here, and the box is labeled number 1, and we had another box next to it. Excuse my drawing here, but I'm going to go with label number 2 here. And so a lot of people will literally break it down, and they'll say, I'm storing evidence on shelf DEF, row, that would be 3 right there, and box 1. And I would suggest the nice thing about that is it is very, very specific about where the evidence is stored at. Whereas down at the bottom shelf, what somebody might do, sort of in opposite of that, they may have a box down there, but they're just going to label this case 1, and the next box may be case number 2. All right, it's still in a box, but it's that case 1 and case 2 is actually not a storage location. It's just a box that says case number 1 and 2 on it. So now, when you hear that and you look at those two methodologies, in fact, it would be interesting to know how many of you out there would more readily identify with the top row versus the bottom row. In fact, what would be interesting is inside there's a chat window inside here. I'd love to get just a little bit of feedback on this, if you don't mind. Look for the chat window inside the GoToMeeting, and you know what? I don't even know that I have the chat window turned on. Maybe I don't even have a chat inside here. Bummer. So I went off on a tangent right here, and I don't have the ability to do that. I know there's a question window in there, but nonetheless, you know what? I'm going to assume many of you use that top row, that's what you would identify with. But there's actually, in fact, the Evidence Management Institute actually will teach situations where the bottom shelving might be more correct. In fact, Sean Henderson, who used to run an evidence room, in fact, he and I have passionate debates about this. In fact, I don't think there's, as crazy as this sounds, I don't think there's one topic that creates more back and forth between he and I than this methodology right here. Yes, I will give you, you would think, what in the world can you talk about here? But yes, he and I do go back and forth on this because I would identify with that one up at the top. I want location storage to be very, very specific. And what he would suggest is by doing the methodology at the bottom where I sort things by case number, that means when I do a large amount of disposition, now again, I'm talking at the bottom, let's assume that I have let's go with a third box down there at the bottom. I have a box that says case 3 on it, okay? And we get rid of case number 2, it's been disposed of. And so now naturally you would just shift that box to the left. But what if we got rid of a bunch of stuff on all 4 rows and now all of a sudden I had all these gaps in the case number sequence? In my methodology up at the top, if I needed to move a case number from one shelf to another, I would have to do a transaction in the software saying it's moving from row 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 or wherever it's moving. Whereas down on the bottom, you actually wouldn't even have to complete a transaction in the software. It would still be on shelf DEF. You just simply shifted it to whatever row is there. And that's one of the primary arguments that I hear for doing something a little more broad, as you would see down at the bottom, is it's a lot easier to move things around. There's a lot less confinement to this really specific order of 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever the box is, as I'm displaying up at the top. However, what I would suggest, and I think this is where the grind really comes into play, there are some people that are a little more skittish on relying on technology to tell me where stuff is stored. And so what I might subscribe is I don't even need to order things by case number on the shelf. I'm going to use my box methodology, and I don't care if case number 1 is next to case number 2 or if case number 1 is at the bottom row and case number 4 is at the top row. I simply don't care where they're at. When I need to find something, I'm going to go to shelf DEF, row 3, box 2, and I know somewhere in that box is going to be what I'm looking for. And normally I would order things by case number inside of that. And that's where the passionate debate takes off, is which one of those methodologies is right and wrong. The answer to that is neither one is right, neither one is wrong. I think you can easily employ either methodology, and there are pluses and minuses to each one of them. And I think you've really got to decide for yourself which one of those are you going to do. Nobody's going to walk in and say, hey, you failed an audit if you use one methodology over the other. I think there are practical reasons to consider one over the other. The other reason I might lean a little more toward the top one is when it comes time to doing random audits or discrepancy reports. In the case of the bottom row, if I'm doing a random audit, the lowest denominator I can get to is shelf DEF. That's it. So if I do an inventory or a spot audit, I have to do that entire shelf at once. Whereas in the top methodology, if I wanted to just do, a random audit on box 2, I could just do an audit on box 2, or I could do it on all of row 3, but I'm not stuck with doing it on the entire shelf at once. Now, I say a random audit, I'm talking about a discrepancy report in our software, where when you do the discrepancy report, you're going to scan every storage locate. You're going to scan every item in whatever storage location you choose. So again, if I do the bottom row methodology, I've got to do the entire shelf at once. There is no breakdown. As a matter of fact, on the top methodology, let's say that an item is in box 1 and it should be in box 2. Because of my breakdown for the storage locations, the actual discrepancy report will show me, hey, wait a minute, this item is in the wrong box. It should be in a different box. Whereas in the bottom row, I would have no idea if something I just scanned on shelf 3 actually on row 1 belonged on row 4, because that methodology doesn't exist at the bottom. So unfortunately, I'm going to leave you with that concept right there. I think it's important to think about it. Again, as I've said, there is no right and wrong answer to that. You just need to really consider, how do you set this up best? And my own selfish answer would be, I'd probably go with the one at the top, but if I had Beth from our office or Sean on here, they would vehemently argue against that, and they would choose the methodology at the bottom. In fact, they might even argue that they might string 4 or 5 shelves together, and they would just move evidence along those shelves and sort of pack in the spaces, and they would always organize things by case number. And I think one of the things Sean would say is, if the software was down and all I knew was it was on this big string of shelves, I could go find what I need with inside of that, because everything's ordered by case number. Okay. Now, what I'm not going to do is, I see that there is a lot of questions, or a lot of comments have been made on here. I'm not going to dig into this, because I think we could spend the next 45 minutes just talking about that concept right there. I actually see somebody's posted on here that they use a mix of both, and I think that's also acceptable. I'm sure that maybe you had a bulk storage area. In fact, let's assume, for example, I'm storing cars. Let's say I have 50 cars in a car lot. I probably would just have one storage location called car lot. I wouldn't try to break everything down to an individual where, that I've got row 1, row. But if I had 5,000 cars in a car lot, well then, yeah, I'm going to need to break that down a little bit, because if you tell somebody, hey, I need you to go find the Ford F-150 in the car lot, and there are 5,000 cars, you don't want to just go digging all around the car lot. They're going to need to know, well, is it in row 1, row 5? And even that right there may be part of what I would say is the reason I want to break it down, because I don't ever want to go to a shelf and look over 5,000 items for one. I want it broken down specifically. And I'll end on this. I think there's latitude for both of them. You're not right or wrong, but I did want to present both of them here today, because I think you definitely got to consider it. Okay, now with that being said, in fact, I am enjoying some of the comments. I'm trying to present here and keep on track, and I'm really enjoying some of the comments that some of you are putting in here. So for those of you that are commenting, especially with some of the funnier comments, thank you for posting them in there. I'm trying to present, and I'm laughing at the same time. So, all right, let's move into actual using our software to set this stuff up. All right, hold on one second. Let me erase all my drawings on the screen. Excellent. Okay, so now we're in the software, and where this all is going to begin. In fact, I don't think what I'm about to show you is new to anybody on here. If you're using our software, you are using storage locations. You don't have any choice but to use storage locations. They have to be set up. And so now that I've gone over a little bit of maybe how you might want to consider it, let me get into some of the specifics about actually setting this stuff up and getting into a little bit of detail and maybe going over some things that you didn't know what it meant. Like, for example, not too long ago, this column for a legacy barcode popped up in here. And you may be saying, what the heck is a legacy barcode? That's what I want to cover right now. So let's start out very, very specifically, and I've got a list of things that I want to go down here. We've covered the possible methods and structures, but now let's just do something really simple. Let's go in and set up some storage locations. Now, going back to the last thing that I presented, one of the things you may want to lay this out on paper before you start really putting it into the software, because what I would suggest to you that as you're employing methodologies for creating storage locations, you got to keep in mind a top-down approach. Level one may very well be, if you're a large organization and you've got multiple buildings, your level one may be building 1 and building 2 and building 3. Whereas a small evidence room, they may actually start out with, if I've got 10 shelves in my evidence room, my top storage location or the root would be shelf 1, 2, and 3. And I'm sorry, I'm not spelling, I'm trying to type fast and do all that. That might be what your structure looks like. So what I'm designing here on the screen right now really might be applicable for one and not the other, but you need to start out with, I would create your root level locations first. So just because I believe this will be applicable to everybody, let's do building 1, building 2, and then off-site, and then we'll do parking lot. Okay, we'll just those will be our 4 root locations that I'm building here. And so when I hit OK, you're going to see there is the locations that I just built: B1, B2, offsite, and parking lot. Now, it's also within this other structure that was already in my site. If you could, for just a minute, just sort of ignore all this other stuff on here. And you may very well be starting with just those 4 locations right there. But then from inside of there, now we're going to start building some depth to these things. So under building 1, we're going to go in and we're going to put, like room 1, room 2, and room 3. And we'll just go with that for right now. And I want to be really quick with this. And let's assume that in building 2, I've got room 4, room 5, and room 6. And so we're going to add those. And so now you're starting to see I've got a little bit of structure that I'm building out right here. And we may go inside of room 1, and this is where we're going to build shelf 1, shelf 2, and shelf 3. Now, admittedly, this is a really, really basic structure that I'm setting up, but what I want you to understand is the depth to all of this, okay? Now, I am employing in my methodology here, in fact, I would go under shelf 1, I'm going to do row 1, row 2, and row 3. So I'm employing that top methodology, but that doesn't mean that I can't have just shelf 2 and shelf 3 down here at the bottom. If these were bulk storage things and I had really large stuff sitting on those shelves, I might not break down row 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so this
Thank
is
you
where
all
you
for
can
joining me today.
both of them.
It looks like we got finished a little bit earlier than I expected. It was a fairly short webinar today. So once again, I thank you all for joining. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving coming up, and you
But
eat
now
lots of
let's
turkey
start to
and
clean
pass
this
out
up a
on the
little bit.
couch
Let's
somewhere.
assume that
Thanks
I want
again,
to,
everyone,
in fact,
for joining the
we've got
webinar, and
a location
hopefully
here
you'll
called
be with
Legacy.
us again next time.
And just to show you how easy this is, I'm going to take every one of these other storage locations that are in here, and just to clean this whole thing up, I'm going to go in and say, hey, I want to move all of this underneath my legacy storage location. And watch what this does very quickly by doing that. Simply going in, pick the locations that I want to move under legacy, and when I save it, watch what this is about to do. It took every one of those storage locations, and I missed shelf A, but it put them underneath legacy now. So I'm starting to clean things up a little bit. So what we see a lot of times, if you're moving evidence rooms, if I'm literally, the department has blessed me with a new building and I'm going to move everything from one building into the other, we get the question all the time, how do I handle that? What do I do with that? So what I would normally suggest to somebody, I would create a new storage location called old locations. And then I would go in here, I would build that out. There's old locations. I would take all of my stuff that is in there, and we're just going to go with the ones I built a minute ago. Now, make sure you do not select the location you're going to move these into, because you can't do that. It'll throw an error. It won't let you do it. So I'm going to go in here and say, yeah, I want to move all of these to old locations. And there it is right there. So now watch what this does. I've got I mean, you can see with a few clicks, I've dramatically changed what my structure looks like. I now have legacy. In fact, this one needs to move under old locations too. So let's go in and just do that. I'm going to move this to old locations. I want to get this thing down to where there's not much at the root level, because the reason I'm suggesting doing this, I've got all of my old locations in my old building with all of my old storage structure. I would go in and build a new locations, and then you're going to build out your new storage structure in your new building underneath there. And then what you're going to do, and this is critically important, you're going to move evidence from the old building into locations into the new building. Okay, I want to restate that again because that's really important. I would not just pick up an entire shelf, put it into a truck, roll over to the new building and roll it out of the truck and stick it into the room as if all is well. Okay, this is your opportunity to do an audit, to do a check on the validity of your old room. And so if you go through the process of moving every item, that's a transaction either on the mobile device or within the software, you're going to scan every barcode on every piece of evidence and you're going to move it into a new storage location. Now, I don't have a problem if you roll an entire storage location on a truck and you roll it to the new building and you roll it off, as long as you don't just stick that new location in the room. You're actually going to move every piece of evidence. And when I say move, I mean the physical process of taking it off the shelf, scanning the barcode, scanning it into the new storage location and putting it into the room. That's how that needs to be handled. And so when all is said and done, once you've scanned every barcode on every piece of evidence and you've moved it from the old to the new, any evidence that's left on those old locations, something's wrong. And more importantly, you'll know that any piece of evidence that shows under the new location structure is good because you scanned the barcode and you moved it. And I would suggest, most importantly, it is absolutely essential that your chain of custody shows that you moved the item from one building to the other. If in your mind, I'm just going to move all this stuff and we're going to set up shop at the new building, and your chain of custody does not signify that move, I think you are dead in the wrong there. And I think you're going to leave yourself open to all sorts of problems by doing so, because if something turns up missing, you have no idea. Did somebody not give it to me to begin with? Was it lost in transit? That's why I think you really got to do what I'm describing right here. And then when you're done with these old locations and you've moved all evidence out of it, then you might take all of these locations that are in the new one and you can move them back out to the root. So for example, let's just say I'm in the new building now and I know what let's just say I want to get rid of this old location, well, these would all be under new locations at that point. But if I want to move them out to the root, you can go in and say, hey, I want to edit these storage locations and I just want to move them out to the root level, because now I've cleaned up my structure. I've got everything where it needs to be. I don't need the top parent to be new locations and old locations anymore. I'm going to move those things out to the root and I'm moving on with life. And now I've got my, you'll still have your legacy stuff in there. Those locations will always exist, but they're not used anymore. In fact, I might even go in and say, hey, I want to edit this thing and I don't want it to be active anymore. Can't store evidence here. It's not active. I'm going to save this. And now we disabled it. It won't show up in the software anywhere. You won't see that storage location or anything under it because you inactivated it. It's gone. Now, I don't know why. Let me go back and try that again. Oh, I'm sorry. I have to click this one. So I turn these off and hit save. Now you'll see that active is false. It's no longer active. This won't show anywhere. But before you do that, make sure there's no evidence in that storage location. And oh, by the way, if you're not familiar with this, this number right here shows you how much evidence is in that storage location. So I've at least got one item in the legacy. The question would be, how do I know if there's, I mean, you can go down here and look and see there's evidence, but what if there's thousands of storage locations and you have no idea, is there evidence at the 8 levels deep? So let me turn this thing back on and show you how you can account for that. If you go in and do a search for items, and then you go down and pick the storage location and say, hey, I want to know, is there anything in the legacy storage location, and include all the sublocations. By running that query right there and hitting search, it'll come back and tell you, in my case, there are 33,287 items within that storage structure. So clearly there's a problem there, and I didn't move everything out. Hopefully what you're down to is, oh, hey, there are 5 items that are still in that old storage location structure. You need to see that list and determine what you're going to do with it. Now, I'm not seeing any questions come in on this topic. If you've got any questions on what I just discussed right there about moving, or even if you want to go back to some questions on it, I'm happy. Jump in with your questions. Just go into the question window of the webinar, and you can post your questions inside of there. Okay, so we've covered how to basically add storage locations. We've covered the methodology. Let me see, I don't see anything coming in, so I'm going to keep moving on. So another couple of rules of thumb you just need to be aware of. You can move storage locations around within your office, but if you're a larger organization and you have multiple offices set up in the system, and if you hear what I'm saying and you're like, I have no idea what an office is, you're not using multiple offices. These are literally for larger organizations that would use multiple offices. Like I have a CID unit, a drug unit, and they're storing their own evidence in their offices. That would be a case for multiple offices. Keep in mind, you cannot move storage locations from one office to the other. That's not a possibility within the software, okay? The other thing, and what I'm about to say is of huge importance, really, really important what I'm about to tell you. If you go in and rename a storage location, so like in this case right here, I'm going to go into parking lot and I'm going to rename this to, we're going to go with the drug room. All right. And so please don't do that. Don't do that. You don't want to do that because our chain of custody is referring to these storage location names. So if you were to rename something like off-site parking lot to my drug room, all of these cars that you ever had in the parking lot are now going to show at one point they were in the drug storage or the drug room. You should never do that. I mean, obviously, I presented you a scenario where you're like, there is no way I would ever do that. And I don't expect that you would go in and rename the parking lot to a drug room, but I'm using that to emphasize, don't rename things unless it's something really simple, like I entered box 8 and it should have been box 9. You know, once you start using storage locations, you know, you got to keep in mind that there's a history attached to that. In fact, right now, you may look over here and see, well, hey, there are no items in the parking lot or the drug room. Why can't I change it? Because historically, if that was ever used, you would be manipulating that. So keep that in mind, not to do that. All right, so we've covered a little bit about creating them. The next thing I want to go over is this legacy barcode. Okay, now I may be saying something that's going to upset some of our really old clients that used our legacy Fluid product. Okay, not too long ago, we built into the software where you could put a legacy barcode in for a storage location, and that means you don't have to relabel your storage locations. So if you're coming from another product into our system and you already have barcodes on shelves, the software now allows you to use those old barcodes. You just put the ID number, or we import it when we help you create them. That ID number goes into this legacy barcode field. And so when you scan that barcode, it'll recognize it as it belongs to this storage location, and it'll bring it up in our software. So I'm sorry for all of you legacy clients that didn't have that option and you reprinted all of your barcode labels. Please don't yell at me. Some of you may hear that and be like, you dirty dog, I can't believe you now have that, but we do have that now. So unfortunately, you were an early adopter and we didn't have that in the system, but it does exist now, okay? Somebody is asking a question. If an officer adds an item and labels it with the wrong case number, can I change the case number on the item for them? Okay, that's actually a really good question. So what this boils down to is, I'm even going to be a little more vague than that. Officer put in information, it doesn't matter what information he put in, and then somebody changes that data. If it's already printed on a label, it's already on that label, going into our software and changing it isn't going to do anything. You're going to need to reprint that label. Even if it's a storage location, you're going to have to, the barcode will still work. It'll still refer to that unique item, but you will need to go in and change whatever your information is to accommodate, you know, the new information. So if it happens to be a case number and that happens to be a really important field, you're going to reprint that label or the storage location name. Now, when you say when an officer adds an item and labels it with the wrong case number, I assume we're talking about an item label and not a storage location label. My guess is your officers, like most officers, are putting items in temporary lockers. They're not controlling the storage location name. So I'm making a lot of assumptions there, and I believe that's what you're saying. If I didn't answer that correctly, you can post something back in there. All right, I'm going to move my question window so that I can see this popping up a little bit more. Okay, so let me look. Another thing that I think is really important when you build out this storage location structure, I want to make a case for something right here. So right now, you'll notice that this row 1, it's in building 1, row 1, shelf 1, row 1. I'm going to rename that storage location right there, and I'm going to make a case for something here. I'm going to name this B1, R1, S1, row 1. So you see that storage location right there? That's a much longer name right now. So the question becomes, why would I call that storage location something really long like that versus just leaving it as row 1 within that whole structure? And here's the answer. I'm going to bring up a case that's already in the software, and I'm going to move an item into that storage structure. So we're going to go in here. Here are 3 items that I just created in the software a little bit ago, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to, it's right now, it's in a temporary locker. In fact, by the way, when I entered these items earlier today, it was in a location called TempLocker/TL1, and because I moved it into that legacy structure, you'll see it's now in legacy TempLockers TL1, okay? So now, I, as the evidence technician, I'm gonna move that item into the evidence room. And here's where that structure really matters. This storage location field here. This is not a drop down where it shows, you know, where you click through 8 drop downs. You can actually go in and start typing in the name of a storage location, and it's going to take you and drill you down right into that. And so let me go the first method. I'm going to hit this little button right here. It's going to bring up everything in my route. Well, I know where I want to put this in. It's in building 1. I'm going to hit the drop down again. I know I want it in row 1. I'm going to go here again, and now I'm going to put it in shelf 1. And then where I really want to put it is in that location right there, B1, R1, S1, R1. Okay? Now, one of the things that this thing provides is I can start typing in the name of a storage location, even if it's that root level location, and it'll drill me down into it. But notice how when I type in R1, it brings up everything that has R1 in it. And I don't necessarily, I will say, I do see it down here at the bottom. It's only because I only had about 15 locations with R1 in it. If you had thousands of storage locations, the odds of it bringing up that bottom level one is slim and none. Now you could scan the barcode, just so you know, you can scan the storage location barcode in that field and it will bring it up where it needs to go. But the reason I named that thing the way I did it is because if I know I want to put it in there and I'm familiar with my structure, I can say put it in B1, room 1, S1, and now all of a sudden it's drilling down, and that's what I want right there. Now I will admit that's a much longer name. It's probably hard for people to remember what those things are. You're generally going to scan the barcode, but I think that there is a reason to consider making those really root level, or those, I'm sorry, the not root level, whatever the other end of the root is, the most child level locations, to be more specific, so that when you're on this screen and you're typing in the name of a location, you can more easily get to where you want. Okay, that's another reason to make these storage location names something unique. Like you'll see back here, if I go back into my storage locations, I did B1, B2, but with inside of these, notice how inside of I've got, well, I did make these unique actually, but imagine it was just row 1, 2, and 3. In fact, normally you would do row 1, 2, and 3 in building 1, or room 1, 2, and 3 in the next building. That's not, all of a sudden you duplicated names. And so I would suggest the more unique you keep all of your storage locations, the more easily you're going to be able to just start typing a name in and finding where you want it to go. Now that may have been confusing right there. I do want to pause for a minute. And this is all anonymous, by the way. If you want to type a question into the question window, nobody else is going to see you typing in. Did that make sense, what I suggested there? Trying to keep location names fairly unique all the way down to the child as much as you can. Because what you don't want to do is have, while I understand, you know, if you start your box numbers over on every shelf, you could have easily 100 box 1s in your building. Well, if I say that the item is in box 1, you know, it's one of all of those. Now, yes, when you see the storage structure to it, you'll know where that box 1 is at. But what I might suggest is all of my boxes start at box 1 and go to infinity. You know, I want box 5,000, 5,001, 5,002, and just have that keep going on and on and on. Okay, let's get into containers for just a minute. I don't see any questions coming in. So let's go back. So within our software, we now have the option to containerize items, okay? A container is a storage location. It really is. In fact, in a minute, when I build out a container, you're going to see it drops it into the storage location structure. A container is nothing more than a grouped set of items that when you do one-to-one item, it does it to all of them. And there is a purpose for containerizing things. So for example, let's go back to that case. The first thing you need to do before I forget to do this is I got to go to settings, organization, and I got to find the setting to turn on containers. So first of all, turn on containers, then you can decide, hey, do I want the software to automatically create the container number for me? I might highly recommend that you do that. So, and here's where that's going to matter. Let's go back. Now that I've turned on containers, I'm going to open up that case that I created a little bit ago, and let's assume that I'm the officer that entered these 3 items. Well, now I'm going to package them all together. I'm going to literally put these in some sort of a box because it's all clothing. I don't really need to tag all these things individually. I'm going to put it in a box and I'm going to seal it. Whether that makes any sense or not based on my items here, pretend that it does make sense for a minute. So because I turned on containers, underneath the action menu, I have the option to add to container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these items and it's going to say, hey, we're putting all these items into a container. Maybe I want to put some notes in here. Maybe I put a signature on that. And now I'm going to hit OK. And watch what this does. The software automatically takes every item and sticks it into the next container number. And even more importantly, next to it, it allows them to generate out a container label. So now your officer can not only take a bunch of items, containerize them, it automatically creates the container number, but now on the outside of that package or box that has been sealed, they can print this label out, stick it on the outside of the box, and now you in the evidence room, you know that every item inside of that box presumably is labeled. It wouldn't matter if it is or not, we'll pretend that it is. And then the outside of the box shows this is the container number, and now from then on, you can begin to do things with those items and moving that container around. As a matter of fact, there's an option in here. Let me go back to storage locations. So you can do one of a couple of things. Now I've got containers in here. I could say, you know what? I don't want that in the containers folder anymore. I want to move it to shelf B1 or, you know, whatever else. So let me do this. I'm going to go back here. And I don't want to move it from this screen. Normally, you're going to do it from within the software. So I'm going to go scan, and I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to put that barcode in that is that container. And when I hit enter, it's going to come back and say, there's your container. I want to take that, and I want to move that container. And now I'm going to move it into my evidence room, and I'm going to put it under, let's put it under B1. Let's go under row 2, and that's where I'm going to put it. We're just going to stick it there for right now. And that container has been moved from, you know, the containers folder into the evidence room, but it is still containerized. And that's going to prevent them from doing transactions on individual items and splitting all of that up. If you have not looked at containers, I would highly recommend you. The purpose of my call today is not to dig into containers, you know, immensely. I just want you to know they exist. They are ultimately storage locations that are a little more specialized than just a storage location. In fact, if I go back into my storage locations and go to B1 right here, row 2, you're going to see there is that container, that storage location in there, and you'll know it's a container because over here on the right, it says it is a container. And so because it has been containerized, it has different properties than just another storage location. Okay. Oh, let me see here. What else do I need to cover? I'm still not seeing any other questions come in. So if you, all right, let's hop into some other basic things inside of here. You should know how to do all of these, just selecting them and then going up here and printing out storage labels. But now, I don't know if you guys know this exists, you can have different storage location labels. So now we allow you to build customized storage location labels. So you can print out, probably most of you by default have one storage location label, but you can now have different storage location labels. So you could have one for drug items and one for money, and you could put different information on the label if it's a money item, you know, or if it's a money storage location. And so, you know, you just go in there, you can build out. I'm not going to get into labels today, but you know, this is how you generate the labels. Just select them and go to reports, select the label you want to print them to, print those out, and now you have storage location labels. I have to believe everybody on here has already done that 1,000 times, so I'm sure there's nothing new inside of that. I'm looking at my notes list and trying to see if there's any. Oh, yes, here's another important one. Access to storage locations based on who you are. So for example, I am going to, let me, hold on one second here. I'm going to, just to reset this thing back up, I'm going to take these items that are now in B1, R2, I'm going to move them, and I'm going to move them back into a temporary storage location. And I'm going to go ahead. It's because I'm an admin, I can move items outside the container. I'm just going to do that for right now. So I want to move these items back into a temp storage location. I think I got to go legacy. Hold on one second. Let me go legacy, temp. Yep. Let's put right there. I'm going to put it under legacy temp locations. Okay, I got signed. Great, I've signed. Those items are all now back into a temporary locker. So the next thing I want to point out is allowing your people, and in fact, what I'm about to throw out can be highly controversial. In fact, you may cringe at hearing what I'm about to tell you, but I think it's important to consider the option of doing this. Did you know in our software that you can allow people to run transactions if they have access to a storage location? Okay, so for example, you could allow your officers to dispose of evidence. And I know right off the bat, many of you are like, what in the world are you talking about? Why would I ever allow my officers to dispose of evidence? Well, let me give you a scenario. Maybe you're a larger organization, somebody's coming in to pick up a lost and found wallet, and they're coming in at 10 o'clock at night, and they're gonna meet the sergeant at precinct 1 to pick up the wallet, okay? And it's 10 o'clock at night. You don't want to be there to do that transaction. And so now the question becomes, how do I allow that officer to do that disposal? And I would suggest to you, you should allow your officers to do that disposal if and only if the item is in a storage location they have access to. So watch this real quick. I'm going to go in, actually here, the first thing I got to do is I'm going to go to permission groups. I'm going to go to my basic users, and I'm going to turn off the ability to do transactions. And I'm going to show you this. So I just went right in here to all of these, and I basically said basic users can no longer do these transactions. So now I'm going to log out, and I'm going to log in as a basic user. All right, so now when I go in and I'm going to bring up that case from a little bit ago, and now you're going to see I've got in here, here are my 3 items. They are sitting in the temporary lockers right now. And if I were to select all 3 of those items, I don't even have check in, check out, dispose. None of those options are on my screen. But again, in my scenario, I want the officer to be able to dispose of items. In fact, let's just say there's only one location in the evidence room where when evidence is sitting, I want him or her, in my case, me, to be able to dispose of those items. So let me show you how we do that. Let me log back in as my administrator because I was logged in as the basic user. And by the way, we're going to record this thing. You can come back and watch it again. So if I blow through this and you're like, what in the world did he just do? We're going to record it. You can come back and watch it again. So I'm going to go into my storage locations, and I'm going to create a new storage location called officer disposal. Now that's a pretty broad term right there, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to create a storage location called officer disposal. And then I'm going to edit that storage location, and I'm going to give my basic users access to that storage location. So again, I go back in, I click the location, I edit it, I put in the group that's going to have access to that storage location, and now you'll notice over here on the right, basic users have access to that storage location. So here's how we do this now. We go back in, we're going to bring up, and let's say, hey, he's only returning the Nike Jordan shoes. So I as the evidence tech, I'm going to move that item into a storage location called officer disposal. I'm going to do that. And now you'll notice that item is now stored in that storage location, office disposal, but pretend it says officer disposal. Now, because Ben Townsend, actually I need to go back in and turn those permission groups on. So we go back into basic users, and I'm going to say basic users now have the ability to dispose of it. But notice that little red dot right there, and it says down at the bottom, you can only do it if you have access to the storage location. So in storage locations, I gave basic users the ability to dispose of evidence. And so now watch what happens when I go back in. I can select, let me log in as that basic user. Okay, so now we're going to go back and watch this. We go into the case, I bring up items 1, 2, and 3. If I click on item number 1, you'll notice now I am seeing the disposal here. I have done something wrong here. So I don't know what I've done wrong, because the only thing I should be able to do is that disposal right there. You know why? I'll bet you anything if I go in, I want to prove myself right on this. I'll bet you basic users have access to those temp lockers. So let's fix it because I don't want you guys to think I'm crazy. I've got enough problems, and there's probably many people that think I'm crazy, but I don't want you to think I'm crazy here. So let's go back into storage let's go into storage locations. We're going to find that legacy. We're going to go to temporary lockers, and look at that. There's the basic users. So now I'm going to take that. I'm going to edit that storage location. I'm going to remove basic users, and now hopefully I'm going to prove myself to be right here. All right, we go in, we bring up that old case now, and we're going to go to items. And now when I select item number 1, aha, that's what I want now. I cannot perform that transaction on that item, but if I go to item number 2, now I can dispose of that item because that item is in a storage location that I have access to. And here's why I think you need to consider allowing your people that do disposals to do the disposal in the software. Because many times what I see is the evidence administrator will print out a piece of paper and they'll give the item to the person and say, here, have the person sign off on it. And then tomorrow morning, I'll go in and do the disposal within the software. The problem that creates is the date and time transaction in the chain of custody is going to show the time that you do the transaction in the software, not when it was actually done by the officer. If you allow and you train your officer to go in, get the paper, get the signed paper, I'm fine with that. But train them on how to open up that case, select that item, and then do the disposition. There are multiple important things that are going to come out of that. Number 1, the date and time of the transaction will be correct. It will be the time that it actually occurred. And even more importantly, it will have been done by the person that actually did the transaction. And so what I see way too many times is people are just simply uncomfortable, and I understand why, giving people access to do a disposal. But you can see by the way that I set that up and did it, you're really limiting what they can do and where they can do it at. If you stick them in the right corner, they're not going to mess that up. I mean, worst case scenario, they just don't complete the transaction and you're going to have to do it the next day. But it's not going to allow them to just go in and start randomly picking evidence out of the evidence room and disposing of it, which I understand is the concern. But if you allow other people than yourself to do the disposals, take that next step and allow them to do the transaction in the software. It makes everything way more correct. I know some of you are going to have to take a deep breath and consider that one. I've seen it. It's certainly a large recommendation. Okay. I don't know that I have anything left to cover. I would like to take a few minutes. No questions. Well, the one question that did come in, I did answer it. Actually, I do see another one. Is there a fail-safe that will bark at you with an error message if you try to deactivate a location when items are still reflected in that location? So James, your question to that, I don't think it's not going to bark at, here, let me log back in as my administrator. It's not going to bark at you because there could be stuff way down the line. You could deactivate a parent with no storage locations. It isn't going to bark because there's stuff way down the line. That's why you're going to do that search before you start deactivating things. And so, yeah, it's not going to bark at you on that. Let me throw something else. Somebody, Justin, threw this out. He threw out a sort of a rule of thumb that he learned at one point, maybe in an evidence training course. Let me see if I can get logged back in here. His rule of thumb was if you can't find, let me read what he said. If you can't find an item easily in under 5 minutes, my storage system isn't granular or organized enough. I would probably agree with that, and I think that is what is going to lean toward the methodology that I would normally propose is that top row up there. Although that is not gospel, I will admit it's not gospel, but I just think you got a much better shot at finding an item under 5 minutes. Although if Sean with Evidence Management Institute was here, he would argue he could find evidence quicker than me. One of these days, I'm gonna spend thousands of dollars and build out an evidence room, and we're gonna do this Mythbuster style. we're gonna put this thing to the test. I wish Mythbuster still exists and they would take this on, because I would love to know some statistical information to prove that methodology. I think I've argued to Sean, if something goes wrong in my methodology, I think I can more easily fix it than he can within his methodology. That's my argument anyways. Because again, I can run a discrepancy report and find what doesn't belong where, and there's no methodology, there's no discrepancy report he's gonna run that is gonna tell him, wait a minute, you've got case numbers out of alignment. It's simply not gonna pick that up. So don't tell Sean I said this, but I'm right, he's wrong. In fact, James, your quote you put on here earlier, I'll let you tell Sean that. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions coming in. So if I don't get anything here within 30 seconds, maybe I'll say my goodbyes. Thank you. This went a little bit longer than I expected it today, but I hope it was worth your time and you learned a few things out of it. If we can be any help at all, please let us know. All right. I don't see anything coming in. So you guys have a great day. We'll see you later.